All right. Okay. Good morning, guys. Happy Friday. Why don't we jump in and get started today? Last time we spent a good long time talking about the Iron Age, talking about Assyria and its relationship to the Mediterranean coast. We looked particularly at the northern coast and the cities of Tyre, of Byblos, these cities that, again, are Phoenician cities. And we focused on the traits and contributions of the Phoenicians and saw how the Assyrians ended up, again, under the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II, ended up bringing bringing the Phoenicians into the Assyrian sphere of control. We saw the establishment of stelae up at places like Nar al-Kelb, which actually you can see right here on your map, again, here from Roth. And how, again, by the end of Sargon's reign, he really had achieved quite a bit in terms of expanding the Assyrian Empire to the outline that you can see here, all the way down to, again, Gaza on the Egyptian border and into the Persian Gulf. Now, Sargon, again, as we said last time, ends up dying on campaign. He dies in a battle against a king named Tabal up in the Taurus Mountains. And again, this is only a few years after the inauguration of this massive building that we saw, this building project that we saw at Khorsabad, at Dur-Sharrukin. That was inaugurated in 707 BCE. Sargon actually dies in 705, just a few years later, and his body, as we mentioned last time, is never recovered. And this is just terrible. I mean, this is a major sign, again, from the gods that Sargon, despite all of his accomplishments, despite all of his posturing to be like the first Sargon, really did something wrong. And as a result, his son, Sennacherib, has to regroup and figure out what he wants to do. Sennacherib is off to a bad start, to say the least. And in order to not commit the sins of his father, he ends up consulting royal oracles and has a number of oracles, to divine the will of the gods and what he should do. And the conclusion that he comes to is that for whatever reason, Sargon II had sinned so badly that the site of Khorsabad was tainted and that it needed to be abandoned outright. So this huge investment that Sargon II put into Khorsabad is abandoned wholesale. Some people continue to live there, but over the course of about 100 years, it's completely abandoned, and Sennacherib ends up moving the capital. He moves it to the south, not quite as far as Ashur. So here's Khorsabad. Not Ashur, but Nimrud, right? He actually finds a site that was previously occupied, a site known as Nineveh. And Nineveh, unlike Khorsabad, has quite a bit going for it. It actually lies at the juncture between the Tigris River and a tributary known as the Kosar River, which you can see here actually bisecting the city. Its location, its access to goods, its access to rather natural resources, water, really makes it a natural capital for the Assyrian Empire, something that Khorsabad really never had going for it. And what's more, it's a site that Sennacherib can stand in and make his own, and really distance himself from his father, who he actually never even mentions, again, in any royal inscription at Nineveh or elsewhere. So it just goes to show how seriously, again, the Assyrians took this. When really the king of the world, right, the king of the four corners of the universe, dies on campaign and his body is dragged off by the enemy. Really, that's something that you pay very close attention to. And we see Sennacherib doing just that in these major efforts that he makes to distance himself from his father. Nineveh, again, is an ancient cultic center that we actually see associated with the goddess Ishtar as early as the 3rd millennium, but never been a major political center or a capital. Nineveh is actually the English name of the Assyrian word Ninua, which would be how the Assyrians would refer to the city. And it was excavated in the 1840s by French teams, by British teams, and most recently actually by a UC Berkeley team, which was led by our own David Stronach in 1987 to 1990. I keep seeing if I can get David Stronach to come in and give a guest lecture. This is the Professor Emeritus who ended up digging with Max Mallowan and knew Agatha Christie, and he's a wonderful man. So I'll keep trying. We have a little bit more time. You can see here that the city itself is built around two mounds. We have two mounds. One is named Kuyunjik, as you can see here, which was fortified as a citadel by Sennacherib. And then also a secondary mound known as Nebi Yunus. And while the upper mound, the main mound, if you will, Kuyunjik has been excavated, Nebi Yunus has never been excavated. And the reason for that is actually there's a mosque and a tomb on top of it, the tomb of Jonah, who is revered not just in Judaism and Christianity as being a prophet, but also in Islam. And so as a result, that site has never been excavated because it still has this sacred connotation to it. So we think, though, however, what we're seeing at Nineveh is very similar to what we've seen at Khorsabad, what we've seen at Nimrud. The same plan, right, with a main palace fortified by a large exterior wall. It's a really, really big wall, which we'll get to in a second. And then, right, this secondary mound of this Akal, Masharti, or show palace, or armory, if you want to put it that way, which would have been at Nebi Yunus. So again, Sennacherib is following in the footsteps of his father, of his grandfather, in the construction of this new Assyrian capital. Again, this is a very, very large city, and it's a city that's famous from a lot of texts, actually. We have Herodotus that writes about the city of Nineveh. We have Nineveh figures prominently in the Bible, which we'll talk about a little bit later, also in Assyrian texts themselves. In the Bible, it was said that Nineveh was so big that it took 3 days to walk around the periphery, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration. It's only about 720 hectares, which is about 8 miles in circumference. So a big city, but certainly not 3 days to walk all the way around. Again, you can see that it's bisected by the Kosar River, which is a fantastic way of keeping your water resources coming to the city in the event of a siege. And indeed, it's very, very well fortified. Sennacherib puts up not just a single wall surrounding the city, but actually 2 sets of walls. Right, we talked about curtain walls before. Here's a reconstruction of those walls and gates. So an interior and an exterior wall, again, to keep people from digging underneath it. Right, we saw these curtain walls at Hattusas in the late Bronze Age. Same system of defense and fortification. Also, the main entrances to the city, the Nergal Gate here in the north and the Shamash Gate here to the east, were defended by additional moats and bridges. You can see here a large defensive moat surrounded the city, which had 2 purposes. Mainly these moats, they might have been filled with water at times, but were probably just open ditches. And you can see a secondary ditch here, which are mainly to keep chariotry away from your archers and away from your infantrymen. So, if you're taking your troops out of the city to fight, again, you don't want chariots rushing in and dispatching them and then rushing back out again. You need defensive positions that you can stand behind. And this is something that Sennacherib was very, very good at. In fact, unlike Sargon and his predecessors, Sennacherib really defines his reign not totally in terms of the campaigns that he goes on, because he certainly continues doing that. He is an Assyrian king, after all, right? So he is going to go on an annual campaign to the north, right, to the out to the Levant, to the west, and then down to Babylon. But primarily, Sennacherib defines himself through his building projects and his very innovative constructions. And we'll see some of those in a little bit. The city itself, again, 30-meter high ramparts with this curtain wall. a lot of effort going into the construction of this city. And what's more, the kinds of engineering projects that feed a city. It seems that Sennacherib's getting back to that Assyrian ideal of a city, which is 1/3 gardens, 1/3 city, and then 1/3 palace. Gardens being very, very important. We find evidence of planted and irrigated gardens and fields throughout the city, which would have borne fruit. And that same idea that we saw at Nimrud, of bringing all sorts of exotic plants from the periphery and bringing them to Nineveh, where they grow better than anywhere else in the world in the Assyrian Empire. In fact, actually, Sennacherib mentions that he discovers a plant that bears wool that clothes can be made out of. And this is cotton. So actually, Sennacherib domesticates cotton and uses it for textile production during this time too. So the wool-bearing tree. And we see this in the reliefs from Nineveh itself. Actually, we can zoom in here and take a look at one of these gardens, which again, a tremendous amount of detail going into the specific types of trees. And there's been work done on these to sort of source them, But these artists that are creating reliefs at the palace at Nineveh, which we'll look at in a moment, spend a lot of time focusing on the particular details. You can see here, there's that aqueduct we just talked about, with its arches, bringing water down and into the canals to fertilize this large open garden, with a nice path running at the center, very, very attractive, and a stele of Sennacherib himself standing in an Assyrian fashion, right? So again, a lot of attention to building projects, and we know also during the reign of Sennacherib, the Assyrians surveyed for new sources for stone. They found new groves of trees to exploit. In fact, Sennacherib refers to himself as he who is clever of understanding. So he was very apt to sort of portray himself as an engineer, as a king, kind of a jack of all trades. Well, not a jack of all trades because he's a king. So how about a master of all trades? In fact, he pioneers new methods of bronze casting, makes it quite easier to cast bronze, and finds new ways of raising water, irrigation, as we saw. But that doesn't mean that everything was fine, especially in this transition period. Essentially, when Sennacherib takes the throne, the Assyrian Empire begins to go into revolt. And we see two major areas of discontent. Again, Babylonia, which has always sort of had a love-hate relationship with the Assyrian heartland, and these territories to the far west, particularly the areas of Judea and Samaria, who at that time, Judea was under the control of King Hezekiah. So we'll come to Hezekiah in a moment, and Weshizib, Marduk of Babylon in the south. These two areas begin to actually conspire with one another to get support and to take advantage of the death of Sargon II, of this power vacuum, and try to renegotiate their situation so they're not just, sort of vassals to the Assyrian Empire. They try to gain power. We'll see how